She was used by the king, discarded like she meant nothing. History calls her a mistress, the other Boleyn girl. A footnote, nothing more. But the truth, it's far darker. Mary Boleyn's own family pushed her into the king's bed. Her husband stood aside and collected his reward. She gave King Henry VIII 2 children, and he refused to acknowledge them. Why? Because years later, he married her younger sister, Anne Boleyn. He gave titles and wealth to his other illegitimate son. But Mary's children? They lived as beggars, while their father wore a crown. And when Henry wanted Anne dead, he used Mary one final time. But what if I told you that after losing everything, Mary made one decision that changed everything forever? She chose herself. And through her decision, her bloodline became more powerful than anyone could have imagined. Queen Elizabeth II, King Charles III, Princess Diana, all descended from the woman they called nothing. This is the tragic death and life of Mary Boleyn. Please like this video. It really helps the channel grow, and share it with other history lovers like you. She was born into a world where women were tools. Mary Boleyn came into this world around 1499 or 1500. The exact year? Nobody knows, because back then, daughters weren't important enough to record properly. Her father was Thomas Boleyn, a skilled diplomat who spoke French, Latin, and Italian fluently, a man who had earned his place at court through service and loyalty. Her mother was Elizabeth Howard, daughter of the Duke of Norfolk, one of the most powerful families in all of England. So Mary wasn't born poor. She wasn't born powerless. It was a king who made her both. She grew up at Hever Castle in Kent, a beautiful place with stone walls and green gardens. She had a sister, Anne, and a brother, George. They lived in luxury. They had tutors. They learned to read and write. They studied music. They spoke French before they could write English.
Thomas Boleyn had proven himself under King Henry VII, when a pretender to the throne named Perkin Warbeck threatened England. Thomas was sent with a small force to put down the rebellion. He succeeded. That loyalty earned him a place among the king's favorites. When Henry VII died and his son became King Henry VIII, Thomas Boleyn remained valuable. He did diplomatic missions. He carried messages to foreign courts. He served his king well. And his daughters? He wanted good futures for them, positions at foreign courts where they could learn, where they could become accomplished women. That's why, when Mary was barely a teenager, he sent them to France.
The year was 1414. Mary was chosen to join the household of Princess Mary Tudor, King Henry VIII's younger sister. She was about to marry the King of France, Louis XII. It was a huge honor. Mary would serve the future Queen of France. She would learn courtly manners. She would see the world. But most importantly, she would make connections. Connections that could help the Boleyn family rise even higher. So Mary packed her things. She said goodbye to Hever Castle, and she crossed the sea to France. She was just a girl, but already she was a tool. The French court was beautiful and dangerous. Princess Mary Tudor married the king in October 1514, but the old king was sick, weak. He died just 3 months later. The princess went home to England, but Mary stayed behind. She joined the household of the new Queen Claude, wife of the new king Francis I. And that's where the rumors began. Francis I was young, charming, handsome, and he had a reputation. He took mistresses openly. He didn't hide it. He didn't apologize for it. And people started to whisper that Mary Boleyn was one of them. Was it true? Nobody knows. There's only one piece of evidence, a letter written years later. In that letter, a French bishop claimed that King Francis had called Mary the English mare. He said Francis called her a great prostitute. But here's the problem. That letter was written in 1536, more than 20 years after Mary left France. It was written during a time when England and France were enemies, when Anne Boleyn was about to lose her head, when everyone wanted to destroy the Boleyn name. So, can we trust it? Probably not. There are no French court records, no letters from Mary, no diary entries, nothing. Just gossip. But gossip sticks, especially when it's about a woman. Whether the rumors were true or not, they worried her father. Thomas Boleyn heard the whispers. He knew how dangerous they could be. A daughter's reputation could destroy a family's name. So he made a decision. He called both his daughters home to England. Mary and Anne came back. And Thomas needed to secure Mary's future quickly.
By 1520, Mary was back in England, and Thomas Boleyn arranged her marriage, a respectable match to protect her reputation and give her a good future. His name was William Carey, a gentleman of the Privy Chamber. He had good standing at King Henry VIII's court. He was cousin to the king through the Beaufort line. He seemed like the safe choice. Did Mary love him? We'll never know. Did she even have a choice? Absolutely not. In February 1520, they were married at the Chapel Royal in Greenwich Palace, and King Henry VIII himself attended the wedding. That should tell you something. The Boleyn family was climbing fast. After the wedding, Mary became a lady-in-waiting to Queen Catherine of Aragon. She served at court. She attended feasts and dances. She was close to the king and queen. Her life looked perfect, but something was about to change. The year was 1522. Mary was at court, young, beautiful, always nearby, and King Henry VIII noticed her. He was only 31 years old, still athletic, still handsome, still the golden king everyone admired. He was charming, powerful, and used to getting what he wanted. And he wanted her. Now, here's the question everyone asks. Did Mary have a choice? The answer is no. And that's the part of this story we need to understand. When a king looks at you with desire, you don't get to say no. Not in Tudor England. Not when that king holds your family's future in his hands. Not when he can destroy everything you know with a single word. Refusing the king wasn't just dangerous for Mary, it was dangerous for her husband, her father, and her family. One wrong move and the entire Boleyn family could fall from favor. They could lose their positions, their lands, their safety. Mary understood this. She had been raised at court. She knew how power worked. She knew that her body, her choices, her life, none of it truly belonged to her. And so, sometime between 1522 and 1525, Henry VIII began an affair with Mary Boleyn. But because he was the king, and she had no power to refuse him, or she was afraid to say no. Imagine what that must have felt like. To know that everyone at court is watching. To know that your husband sees it all. To know that your family expects you to please the king. To pretend it's an honor. Mary had no voice in this. No choice. No escape. Her husband knew. Of course he knew. Every stolen glance, every whispered command, every secret meeting, he knew. Everyone at court knew. But William Carey didn't say a word. Not a warning, not a protest. Why? Because his silence bought him everything he could want. Land, grants, money, titles, positions in the royal household. He watched the king use his wife, and he did nothing. He let it happen. And in doing so, he chose his ambition over her pain. He was being rewarded for looking the other way. Or maybe, like Mary, William Carey was trapped, powerless, helpless, forced to watch the king take what he wanted, even when it was his own wife. In that court, knowing was not the same as acting, and in that silence, both their lives were quietly broken. Mary was doing her duty. She was serving the family. Now she is serving her husband, just like she had been taught. But what about Mary? How did she feel? There are no letters, no diary, no record of her voice, just silence.
Maybe she liked the king. Maybe she felt trapped. Maybe both. We'll never know. But we do know this. During those years, Mary had 2 children, a daughter named Catherine, born in 1524, and a son named Henry, born in 1526. Were they the king's children? Many historians believe they were, but King Henry VIII never claimed them. Not once. And here's where it gets cruel. Henry had another illegitimate child, a son named Henry Fitzroy. His mother was Bessie Blount, another of the king's mistresses. Henry acknowledged that boy. He gave him the title Duke of Richmond. He raised him in luxury. He educated him like a prince. But Mary's children? They carried William Carey's name. They would live as commoners. They would never know their real father. Why? Because acknowledging them would mean admitting the affair publicly. It would mean admitting he slept with a married woman. And years later, it would mean admitting he slept with his future wife's sister. So Henry stayed silent, and Mary's children grew up as nobodies, even though they might have been royal blood. By 1526, the affair was over, because Henry's attention had moved on to someone new, Anne Boleyn, Mary's younger sister. Anne was different, intelligent, sharp, confident. She saw the court for what it really was. She saw how the king used women and then discarded them like dirt. And when King Henry wanted her, she said no, not as a mistress. If you want me, you marry me. Henry was obsessed. For the next 7 years, he tore his kingdom apart, trying to make Anne his wife. He broke with the Catholic Church. He created the Church of England. He defied the Pope, all for Anne. And Mary? She watched from the shadows. She watched her sister rise higher and higher, while she faded, slowly, painfully, into the background. Then, in 1528, tragedy struck. William Carey died. Sweating sickness, a disease that killed fast and without mercy. Mary was left a widow with 2 young children and almost no money. William's estate was small. Most of it went to pay his debts. The woman who had once shared a bed with the king was now struggling to survive. Her children had no future, no titles, no land. They were living like beggars, while their father, if he was their father, sat on a throne. Anne saw this, and she helped her sister. She arranged a small annuity for Mary, a little bit of money each year. It wasn't much, but it was something. Meanwhile, Anne and Henry finally married in 1533. Anne became queen. She was crowned as the Queen of England, shining in gold and jewels. But Mary saw more than just the crown. She saw Anne refusing to be a mistress. She saw Anne demanding marriage. She saw Anne fighting for control of her own life. And even though Anne lost in the end, she had tried. She had choice. Maybe it was time Mary did the same. Maybe she too had the right to make her own decisions, to love someone freely, to be cared for, not used. Maybe she could take her life into her own hands. The year was 1534. Mary fell in love. His name was William Stafford. He was a soldier, low rank, no fortune, no titles. He was nobody, a commoner, and Mary married him, secretly, without asking permission, without telling her family, without telling the king. This was unthinkable. In Tudor England, noble women didn't choose their own husbands, especially not poor soldiers. When her family found out, they were furious. Her father, Thomas Boleyn, disowned her. Her sister, Anne, now Queen of England, banished her from court, not because she wanted to hurt Mary, but because Mary had embarrassed the family. The allowance Anne had arranged? Gone. Mary was cast out, cut off, alone. She could have begged, she could have apologized, she could have tried to crawl back into favor. But she didn't. She tried to explain herself to her family, but no one listened. They turned a deaf ear. So Mary did what she could. She wrote letters to her sister Anne, to her father, to Thomas Cromwell, the king's most powerful advisor. In that letter, she explained herself, and she wrote one line that said everything. She wrote, "I had rather beg my bread with him than to be the greatest queen in Christendom." Read that again. She would rather beg, rather live in poverty, rather have nothing than be a queen without freedom. It was a direct message to her sister, to her family, to everyone who had ever saw her as she has no choice of her own. She choose love, she choose herself, and she don't care about power anymore. Mary and William disappeared from court. They lived quietly in the countryside, probably at Rochford Hall in Essex. They had no wealth, no servants, no grand estate, but they were free. For the first time in her life, Mary Boleyn was free. But her fate was as tragic as the life she had lived. Mary and her family are struggling for money. They had to fight for every penny. Some historians believe that Anne quietly sent Mary a gold cup and some money, a final act of sisterly love, but no records survive to prove it. If Anne did send help, it wasn't enough. Mary was living the consequences of her choice, the choice to marry for love instead of position, the choice to walk away from power. And then came another blow. Mary became pregnant with William's child. For a moment, perhaps, there was hope, a new beginning, a child born from love, not duty. But her body, weakened by years of stress and poverty, couldn't carry the pregnancy. The child didn't survive. Mary was left with only Catherine and Henry, the children from her first marriage, the children who might have been the kings, the children who would never know the truth of who their father really was. She had chosen freedom, but freedom came with a price she paid every single day. 2 years later, everything fell apart. Henry grew tired of Anne. She had given him a daughter, Elizabeth, but no son. He wanted a son, and Anne was in his way. So once again, Henry brought up Mary. He said his marriage to Anne was cursed, that he had slept with her sister, that God was punishing him again. He used Mary's affair to justify getting rid of Anne. In 1536, Anne Boleyn was arrested, charged with adultery, with treason, with plotting to kill the king. The charges were false. Everyone knew it, but Henry wanted her gone. Anne was executed on May 19, 1536. Mary's brother, George Boleyn, was executed too. And their father, Thomas Boleyn, sat on the committee that sentenced them both to death. He chose his own survival over his children. Where was Mary during all of this? Far from court. Living in the countryside with William Stafford. There's no record that she attended the trial. No record that she was there when Anne died. Did she mourn? Certainly. Did she feel guilt? Maybe. Did she feel relief that she wasn't there? Possibly. But one thing is clear. The sister who had once helped her was dead. The sister who had given her money when she had nothing. The sister who had tried to protect her children, gone. The family that had raised her was destroyed, scattered, broken. And the king? The man who had used Mary's body, discarded her, used her name to destroy her sister? He was living his life with his new wife, Jane Seymour, as if none of it had ever happened, as if Boleyns had never existed at all. Mary had lost everything, but she was still alive, still free. And somehow that felt like both a gift and a curse. Mary lived the rest of her life in the countryside. She never returned to court. She never asked for forgiveness. She never tried to come back. She and William struggled. They had little money, no grand home. Mary, who had once courted with kings, now lived in poverty, but she never regretted her choice. When Thomas Boleyn died in 1539, Mary inherited part of the family estate. It was enough to support her children, Henry and Catherine. On July 19, 1543, Mary Boleyn died. She was around 43 or 44 years old. The cause of death is unknown. The location of her grave is unknown. She may have been buried at St. Andrew's in Rockford, but the church records don't survive, and her tomb has vanished, possibly destroyed during the Reformation. No memorial, no grave. She died poor, she died forgotten. But here's the twist. Her legacy didn't die with her.
Remember her children, Catherine and Henry Carey, the ones King Henry VIII never claimed, the ones who grew up as commoners. They didn't stay that way. Her daughter, Catherine, served in the households of Anna von Cleves and later Elizabeth I, and made a strong marriage to Francis Knollys. Mary's son, Henry Carey, grew up to become one of the most trusted advisors to Queen Elizabeth I, his cousin. Elizabeth always looked after her maternal family. He was given titles, land, respect. He became Baron Hunsdon, and through him, Mary's bloodline spread. Her descendants include Queen Elizabeth II, King Charles III, Princess Diana, countless noble families across Europe. In the end, Mary's bloodline became more powerful than Anne's. Anne had one daughter, Elizabeth I, who never had children, but Mary's line carried on, generation after generation. Mary didn't die a queen, but her blood runs through royalty. In the end, Mary may have lost the court, but she had won something far more enduring: family, freedom, and a life written on her own terms. Today, Mary Boleyn's bloodline lives on. Some of her descendants remember her quietly, one even sending flowers every year to the grave of her sister, Anne Boleyn, on the anniversary of Anne's execution. In a life that began in shadows and sorrow, Mary's legacy endured through love, survival, and the family she fought to protect. History called her a mistress. They called her shame. Her sister was called a seductress. But it was Anne Boleyn's daughter gave England its golden age. And it was Mary Boleyn's children who carried the royal bloodline through centuries, through crowns, through time itself. So tell me, who truly won in the end? Because when history turned its back, it was the forgotten sister who changed it forever. If you believe Mary Boleyn's bloodline deserves to be remembered not as a mistress, but as the mother of kings and queens, like this video, share it with other history lovers, and let her story live on.